Thank you very much. So I was saying, in my culture in Zimbabwe, you'll never have such a beautiful and powerful introduction until the day you die. So thank you very much for that. And I'm from Zimbabwe. That's the black guy you're seeing over there. And somebody had to tell the story of Africa. We'll hear things from Colombia. We've heard the narrative from Eastern Europe, something from Asia, and we have heard stories from Michigan. And somebody had to tell the story of Africa. And that person happens to be the black guy standing in front of you. And I want to thank the Rotary Foundation for making sure that almost every year there's someone from Africa. What you're basically contributing to, you are basically contributing to the story of Africa. You're providing space for the narrative of Africa to be told and for the Africans to research and contribute in the process of developing their own land, their own people, and tell their own story. In short, if you are going to forget everything about the long political rhetoric and hegemonic masculinity, the discourse analysis of what you should remember is that I was only trying to add my voice to the story of Africa, the story of the people of Africa. It's a long and winding story which cannot be told by the pictures on the magazines of NGOs. It's a story that cannot be told by summaries of the lives of eminent individuals like Robert Mugabe and Nelson Mandela. There's more to the story of Africa, and that story can best be told by Africans. And so that's the summary of my thesis. I was just trying to add my voice to the story of Africa, and thanks to Rotary Foundation, and thanks to the ICU Rotary Peace Center. In my study, I was looking at the nexus of politics and gender, that confluence where politics mix gender. That's the black samurai standing over there. And this is the outline that I'm going to go through. I'll tell you what I was doing before I came to Japan, why I chose the topic, the research. Then I'll tell you about what I'm planning to do next after the fellowship. That lady I was sitting with, that was a month before I came to Japan. She's blind. You'll be surprised she's not as old as she looks. All her daughters have taken to prostitution in South Africa. And she's left with AIDS orphaned grandchildren. That's her heart. She stays in there with teenage boys and girls. They fit in there. They don't have a toilet. They use that small heel. And the leg that she's holding to the right, the knee was dislocated as she fell as she was on her way up that small hill to relieve herself. She uses that as the toilet. That's the work I was doing with rural women in Zimbabwe. These are the people that got the land from President Robert Mugabe. And that's the other side of the story of Zimbabwe that is not told. I was working with the poor and I was working with poor women. The story of Zimbabwe is not as simple and complex. If people are to tell it today, they'll tell you that Zimbabwe is under problem because there is a bad leader who's under sanctions. But that's not the truth. Over the past 50 years, before even independence. So from now, dating back 50 years, Zimbabwe has been under sanctions for 28 years. Even under white colonial rule, we were under sanctions. So the story is complex and it cannot be told easily. What I decided to do was just to look at one little component and add my voice to it. Before coming, I was also working with men and boys in Zimbabwe, mobilizing them against gender-based violence, to give their own participation, to write a new constitution. We're challenging issues around domestic violence. Before coming, I also tried my hand at actually mobilizing people politically. This was the rally. This rally was on the 31st of July. And 2 days afterwards, I was on the plane to Tokyo. I was doing my part. The story continues. But then when I came here, I looked at what I wanted to study. And I looked at my academic background, where I studied political science, and here I was studying peace studies. Then my work was on gender and masculinity issues, and also political activism. And I wanted to look at that intersection between all these three areas. And I said, well, let me look at political rhetoric, the speeches of our president, and how it has contributed to the rise of gender-based violence in Zimbabwe, directly or indirectly. So that's how I came to choose that topic. And the problem that is there in Zimbabwe is the rising cases of gender-based violence. 60% of all murder cases that were brought before the High Court were all related to domestic violence. That's a 2013 statistic. Gender-based violence has been identified as one of the key drivers of HIV and AIDS. And the Millennium Development Goal number 3 was identified as the priority goal for Zimbabwe. And Millennium Development Goal number 3 focuses on gender. Gender-based violence costs Zimbabwe $2 billion annually. Well, if you're coming from a big economy like China, China, Japan, US, you might not understand the impact of $2 billion. But we are talking of $2 billion in a country with a population of 13 million people. So if you are going to divide that and look at the per capita cost of gender-based violence, you see that it's really huge as a percentage. We tried from independence in 1980 to enact 17 pieces of legislation that are directly related to gender-based violence. And the 18th piece of legislation was enacted last week or 2 weeks ago. The progress we are trying to make, but on the contrary, the cases of gender-based violence are rising. That's His Excellency President Robert Gabriel Mugabe. He has been in power for 35 years since our independence in 1980. He's 91 years old, making the oldest elected president in the world. And he ruthlessly killed people from a minority tribe in the western part of the country. And in my opinion, my personal opinion, he's worried about staying in power at whatever cost, and no freedom after speech is there. So abductions, missing persons, just last week, one guy called Itai now clocked 100 days when he's missing. He staged a one-man demonstration against President Mugabe's rule. If you come to Zimbabwe, these things I'm telling you about, you will not see them. You will not see them. No wonder why the African Union Commission on the 2013 elections, President Thabo Mbeki of South Africa, when he was asked, he said there is no crisis in Zimbabwe. When we would go to the shops and find nothing. So if you're going to come, you will think that it's a perfect country. Actually, Zimbabwe, there is no gun culture. There is no knife culture. If you're going to come as a foreigner, a Japanese, you ask the next person, they will direct you exactly to where you want to go. Nobody will rob you, nobody will beat you, nobody will harass you. But there are problems in this society, and gender-based violence is one of them. So what I did was, in my thesis, I analyzed the speeches of the president, His Excellency President Robert Mugabe. I read his speeches that he delivered between 1980 and 2014, looking for what are known as hegemonic masculinities. And simply put, these are negative or poisonous ideas about what it means to be a man. I sought to draw linkages between what he said in his speeches and the cases of gender-based violence that are increasing in Zimbabwe. And what did I find out? I found out that the president of Zimbabwe has a profound influence on the people of Zimbabwe. And he has a profound influence because, number one, he is the liberator who brought independence to a war-torn country that had been fighting the Rhodesian regime, insurgents from South Africa, and the freedom fighters. The country was torn. And he also is an educated guy who speaks Spanish, who has delivered tangible benefits to his people. And so he has so much profound influence. And we are talking of a country that has only state-controlled newspapers, state-controlled radios, and state-controlled TV station. So he has profound influence. Violence is bound to increase in Zimbabwe if the leader of the country is setting a bad example by promoting violence, abuse, homophobia, disrespect for women in his speeches, whether directly or indirectly. These were my findings. You might be interested to know what the president says. He directly threatens people with violence. He also promotes the use of violence to remain in power. He also uses the art of glorifying war. We went to the trenches and he is so eloquent. He's one of the most eloquent men I've ever seen in my life. If you listen to him and if you meet him personally, he's very persuasive, charming, and at 91 years old, you'll be amazed how he will convince you that he has got a very good agenda. He disrespects women in his speeches. And you need to have studied issues around gender for you to understand the subtle influence that he has on the people. The disrespecting differences, for example, people who are gay, white people, other men, Jews, different tribes, and this has created an indirect culture that fosters violence. And now I wonder what has happened. All right, we are back to reality. Whilst we are striving to end violence, the president is promoting violence in a hidden way. That's the conclusion I came to. Intervention efforts are centered towards the symptoms of the problem. The United Nations, the UN Women, UNFPA, and other agencies that are working in Zimbabwe are focusing on the symptoms. But the problem is structural, and it can be compounded by other issues like colonialism, like imperialism, like the New World Order, and the president in his speeches is sort of reacting to these issues, and so he's fostering an environment where gender-based violence is bound to increase. And after the fellowship, the first and most important point is the one at the bottom: I want to get married. I hope to get a PhD in politics and social transformation. And I hope to work on community development projects in rural Zimbabwe, mainly focusing on girls' education and ending violence against women and poverty alleviation and community empowerment. This is a mouthful, but I will look for my space in there and do something. After the fellowship, one of my dreams is to host Japanese Rotarians visiting Zimbabwe. Please come to Zimbabwe. You need to see this country. It's the country that is bordered by Botswana, Zambia, Mozambique, and South Africa. And so you should come. It's the most central part of Southern Africa. And you'll be lying to yourself that you've visited Africa if you have not been to Zimbabwe. It's a rich history and a country that is so diverse. It had trade links with Asia since the 13 and 1400s, so you should come. One Rotarian from Ginza told me that he visited Zimbabwe 5 years ago with his family, and they had a wonderful time. Deskara, Rotarian no. Kyuka no tokiwa sei Zimbabwe ni kute kite kudasai. Those are pictures of me and the Rotarians. This was the Mitaka Rotary Club function. We're enjoying the drum session. That's me with one of my favorite Rotarians from Mitaka Rotary Club. That's with my host, Councillor Mr. Kuboyama. I had a wonderful time, and thanks to the generosity of the Rotarians worldwide. Arigato gozaimashita. Thank you to attend.
So we get, oh, Yuri, you were ready. Okay, let me run a microphone back to you. You have a question.
You have a translator with you?
Oh, translator. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes. ジェンダーの研究をしている方というと普通です女性の方が多いと思うんですけれども、ニクソンさんのように男性がこういった男女平等の問題ですとか女性のエンパワーメントに取り組むことの意義有用性っていうのと、あとそれからどのようにしたらもっと多くの男性がこういうジェンダー問題ですとか男女平等の問題にモビライズされると思いますか。お願いします。Understand what?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do. Should I go? Yeah, so it is important for men to be part of it, and the ACDP conference of the United Nations acknowledged that there is need for men to be part of this. Gender is not only about women, it's about men and women. But the way it was presented, especially the way it was brought about in Africa after the 1995 Beijing conference, it was a confrontational issue where it created fights. It created more problems than the intended plan. So there's need for women basically to be part of this work. There are several ways of doing it, but the very important thing that I must emphasize is that men are different. Men are different. They are Zimbabwean men, and within Zimbabwean men are different. And so you need to understand men, go where you can find the men, and don't use the same approaches you use with women to deal with men. When you're working with gay men, they're different. When you're working with Zimbabwean tribal men, they're different. When you're working with Japanese salary men, they're different. When you're working with Japanese ICU students, they're different. So look at the different types of men that you're working with. Ask them how best you can reach them, and I think that's the best way to work with them. Yeah.
Anybody else have a question? Oh, you're already ready. Okay.
Well, that's great, man. I mean, the role that you get, you're wearing, let's say, and bearing, and Hello? Yeah. Okay, so tell me one thing. I mean, and it's not just only, I really like how you say that the gender issues is not only about women, but about women and men. And I've been wondering, not lately, but I've been wondering about, how men, we lack of roles, in that kind of, somebody to mirror to, to learn from. Right? Okay. I mean, it's a Zimbabwe issue. I mean, you can see, with your big brother, let's say, but it's not only that. So, what can you say, and go for it, man? I mean, we really need roles, and I think this is part of what you're aiming for, yeah?
Yep. Role modeling is important. We need good role models for men and boys. We need good parents. We need good fathering, but we also need good political leaders who portray a good and positive image to men and boys so that they believe that it's possible. I can't agree with you less on that.
Does anybody else have a question? Oh, is that a hand? No, okay. Oh, over here, Yuko, I see you.
So thank you very much for interesting presentation, Nixon. It may not be something that you have analyzed in your thesis, but Mugabe, he's 91 years old and he's not a superhuman, so he's probably going to die sometimes. And I wanted to know if there is any sort of, what is your perspective on Zimbabwe after his time, and what does it mean for gender-based violence or in terms of gender fora?
He will go where all human beings go. That's a fact. And what is going to happen after him has been a subject of speculation, but people have been talking about it in hushed tones, and I'm talking about it freely because I'm in the security of these walls. But in terms of gender-based violence, the culture that he has created, not only gender-based violence, but violence per se, will persist with us for quite some time. It's just like the legacy of colonialism. Colonialism is gone, but its effects, we are living with it to this day. So his legacy will go on. I've always joked with people that he is one guy who's going to rule us even from his grave. He's going to have influence on us even when he is decomposed to bones. So we need to put up measures to work on programs even after he is gone so that we create a new culture that is good for everyone.
Unfortunately, that's time, so let's give it up for Nixon one more time.